Okay. Hey everybody, it's Nathaniel Lavilla reporting from Dallas County. How are we? Who's here today?
Hey, it's Hanyu.
Hello. What are we talking about today?
I believe we're continuing our last episode with the Havana Syndrome.
Right. So a quick thing. It's basically a recap. It's basically a bunch of medical symptoms of unknown causes, experienced mostly by like U.S. government officials and military personnel. It started in Havana. Uh, Basically, it impacted Americans and Canadian ambassadors. It happened in like their hotel rooms where they would hear like this high pitched noise coming in. It was studied by a bunch of scientists and journalists. Always covered it, and they think it's either caused by microwaves, or it was actually crickets, or it was done by pesticides, or it was some kind of like psychogenic thing, or it was or it was like some kind of mass hysteria, mass psychogenic illness. So let's continue on 2017. Suspected attacks targeting U.S. intelligence personnel were reported in an expanding set of locations around the world, including Moscow, Georgia, Poland, Taiwan, and Australia. Now, other reports came from Colombia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Austria, among other countries. So now this Havana Syndrome is expanding to outside of Cuba. What do you think that means?
Hmm. That means it's either moving around or someone just wants to not be the center of attention anymore.
Okay. What is moving around? What is it that like makes it move around?
The roaches, of course.
It's the
Or was
roaches.
it the rats?
I think it was crickets. So
One of those.
yeah, one of them. So the U.S. government has not released a number of affected persons, but media reporting indicated it was a total of 130 possible cases by the end of May 2021, rising to more than 200 possible cases by mid-September 2021. The cases variously affected CIA, U.S. military, and State Department personnel and their family members. Some reports after investigation were determined to be possibly related to Havana Syndrome, while others were determined to be unrelated. Now, some reports after investigation were determined to be possibly related to Havana Syndrome, while others were determined to be unrelated. BBC reported in 2021 that one former official reckons around half the cases reported by U.S. officials are possibly linked to attacks by an adversary. Oh no. Who is the adversary?
The Russian government.
The Russian, but the Russians were also affected.
I mean, the U.S. always does things to themselves, so, I mean,
Okay.
why not have someone else do it to themselves to take us off the smell?
Right. So, fast forward to 2018, U.S. diplomats in China began reporting symptoms consistent with Havana Syndrome. Now, the first such incident reported by an American diplomat in China on April 2018 at the Guangzhou consulate, the largest U.S. consulate in China. Now, the employee reported that he had been experiencing symptoms since late 2017. Several individuals were taken to the U.S. for medical examination. A USAID employee at the U.S. Embassy in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, reported a different incident in September 2017. The employee's report was discounted by the U.S. State Department. Now, answering questions from the House of Foreign Affairs Committee in May 2018, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo testified that U.S. diplomatic staff in Guangzhou had reported symptoms very similar to and entirely consistent with those reported from Cuba. June 6th, 2018, the New York Times reported that at least 2 additional U.S. diplomats stationed at the Guangzhou consulate had been evacuated from China and reported that it remains unclear whether the illnesses were a result of attacks at all. Other theories have included toxins, listening devices, and accidentally emanated harmful sounds, or even mass hysteria. In June 2018, the U.S. State Department announced that the task force has been assembled to investigate the reports. They expanded their health warning to all of mainland China amid reports some U.S. diplomats outside of Guangzhou had experienced the same symptoms resembling a brain injury. The warning told anyone who experienced unusual acute auditory or sensory phenomena accompanied by unusual sounds or piercing noises to not attempt to locate their source. So yeah, that's what's going on in Guangzhou, China. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, if it's just being, don't locate where the noise is, that means it's a possibility that they don't want people snooping around.
Yeah, do you think
government conspiracies and all of that.
You think they have something to hide?
Every government has something to hide.
Okay.
Or it wouldn't be our government.
Yeah. So fast forward again, 2019. The White House official reported experiencing a debilitating symptoms while walking her dog in a Virginia suburb of Washington. Now, the incident was publicly reported in 2020. On November 2020, a similar incident was reported in the Ellipse, a lawn adjacent to the south side of the White House. Now, both incidents were similar to those that have reported to have struck dozens of U.S. personnel overseas, including CIA and State Department personnel. Federal agencies investigated the incident at the Ellipse, and Defense Department officials briefed members of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee in April 2021. Now, investigators told members of Congress that they had not been able to determine the cause of events or who was responsible. So now it is going on in our own backyard in D.C. So it's here in America now. What's going on there?
Oh no! Almost as if it followed people.
Okay, you think they brought it with them? Like the syndrome just brought, they brought it with them here?
Well, if they can't seem to find what it is, and it's crickets or anything like that, it doesn't say it can't be dead crickets.
Yeah.
Anything can die in certain spots, and you wouldn't even know until you find it later.
Yeah, but I don't know how do they get from Cuba to America? I mean, Cuba's an island.
Lots of things can still ride on other things. Okay. We are humans.
Yeah.
We can't we try to control things the best we can, but things still get on. That's why we have an invasion of fire ants that were not native to the United States.
Okay. So fast forward again, August 2021. It was reported that 2 American diplomats were evacuated from the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi after incidents of Havana Syndrome were reported. Now, these reported cases also delayed Vice President Kamala Harris to visit to Vietnam. Now, in September 2021, a CIA aide-de-camp of Chief William J. Burns reported symptoms consistent with those of Havana Syndrome on a diplomatic visit to India. So, there goes that. So, 2021, dozens of U.S. personnel stationed in Vienna, including diplomats, intelligence officials, and some children of U.S. employees, had Havana Syndrome-like symptoms. Now, the State Department confirmed in July 2021 that it was investigating the reports. Now, the Austrian Foreign Ministry stated that it was collaborating with American investigators. Aside from Havana, Vienna was reported the most incidents. While no suspects were named for the Vienna cases, it has been noted that Vienna was hosting indirect talks between the United States and Iran on reviving the 2015 Iran deal. Now, in September 2021, the CIA station chief in Vienna, which is the top intelligence officer in the country, was recalled over concerns over his management. He had been criticized for not taking quicker action in response to the Havana Syndrome cases at his post. So, what do you think is going on here in Vienna? And do you think that this is like a bit of a coincidence going on that it happened during the negotiations between America and Iran over the Iran deal?
No, don't. I'm supposed to be surprised, but when it comes to the United States, I am not.
Okay. Do you think they were trying that whoever is behind this syndrome is trying to stop this deal?
No,
They wanted
I
to.
don't think so.
Then why are they having people like having Havana syndrome like symptoms?
I mean, it was happening before this deal.
Mm.
It's just been spreading, so it's just a contaminant that has no control and no owner.
Mm. No, the crazy thing about this is that it only affects Americans and Canadians. So why is that?
I don't know. We'll have to, go back and replay Metal Gear Solid 5, I believe.
Okay.
Where what's her name? Val's a vow of silence because she can give the disease that only affects those that speak English. What does anyone want to know about anything?
Right. So, months later, preceding August 2021, months earlier, before August 2021, cases of Havana Syndrome were reported at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, including 2 U.S. officials who sought medical treatment. Several new cases were reported at the embassy on October 2021. In 2021, the CIA evacuated an intelligence officer serving in Serbia, suspected of being a victim on the neurological attack. 3 White House staffers reported symptoms of the Intercontinental London Park Lane in May 2019. Now, one of the CIA officials with the symptoms in Australia and Taiwan was one of the agency's top 5 ranking officials. Now, the Russian embassy in Australia dismissed reports of the Russian operatives targeting CIA personnel in Australia. So, that's what's going on. Do you think it was Russia that's doing this thing? Because the Australians don't seem to think so.
No.
Okay. So fast forward to October 2021, it was reported that the U.S. Embassy personnel and their families in Bogota had developed symptoms consistent with Havana Syndrome, and that's pretty much about it in terms of like other places outside of Cuba where it happened. So let's move on to what's going on in February 2021. The State Department said that its ongoing investigation was a high priority for the department. Now, citing unnamed intelligence and government officials, the New York Times reported in July 2021 that the National Security Council, Central Intelligence Agency, and Director of National Intelligence established 2 outside panels, one to investigate potential causes and the other to develop defensive countermeasures for personnel protection. Cleared external scientists will be permitted to view relevant classified intelligence in their investigations. In January 2022, the CIA issued a report on the interim findings of a comprehensive study of 1,000 cases. Now, the report concludes that a majority of cases can be attributed to the environmental cases, undiagnosed medical conditions, or stress rather than a persistent global campaign by a foreign power. Now, the CIA is still investigating 24 cases that remain unexplained. So what do you think? Is the CIA going to get to the bottom of this?
No, they're not. I mean, they're going to assure the public that this is going to happen. But is it going to finish? Who knows?
Okay. What about because they have the help of the NSC and the DNI. So there's that. Also, the State Department. I think they're part of the State Department. So many current and former U.S. officials think Russia was most likely responsible for the alleged attacks, which you said no to that. You disagree to that.
Yes, I
Okay.
did.
You disagree to that Russia was the one behind these. So, a suspicion shared by both Trump and Biden administration officials. So this view was shared by CIA analysts on Russia, State Department officials, outside science experts, and several of the alleged victims. Russia has a history of researching, developing, and using weapons that can cause brain injuries, such as the Cold War era Moscow signal, targeting the American embassy in Moscow. A 2014 NSA report raised suspicions that Russia used a microwave weapon to target a person's living quarters, causing nervous system damage, and Russia has an interest in disrupting cooperation among the US, China, and Cuba. Now, the U.S. diplomats stationed in China and Cuba were reported ailments were working to increase cooperation within those countries, and some CIA analysts voiced suspicion Russia thus sought to derail their work. So, what are you thinking? Do you still think Russia didn't do it?
No, I don't.
Okay, why? Why?
Because this is for specific people, and it doesn't seem to be everyone. Where Russia just wants to get rid of the U.S., so why just stop at high-ranking officials when you can get any populace?
Right. It's very interesting thought. So, May 2021, Politico reported that 3 current and former U.S. officials with direct knowledge of the discussions said that the U.S. government suspected that Russia's military intelligence agency, GRU, was behind the alleged attacks. So, although the U.S. Intelligence Committee have not reached a consensus or made a formal determination, so it's still up in the air. But they're thinking that the GRU is the most likely candidate. So in May 2021, the New Yorker reported that the U.S. government's working hypothesis was that GRU agents have been aiming microwave radiation devices at U.S. officials to collect intelligence from their computers and cell phones, and that these devices can cause serious harm to people they target. Now, the U.S. government has not publicly accused Russia. Now, the U.S. intelligence officials privately call the events attacks, but publicly call them anomalous health incidents. A very, very way to dance around the words. So, according to 2 officials interviewed by Politico, this is what they said. So, while investigators have not determined definitively that these attacks are caused by a specific weapon, some believe any such device could be primarily transported by vehicle, and some could be small enough to fit into a large backpack. And an individual can be targeted from 500 to 1,000 yards away. Now, James Lin of the University of Illinois, an expert in biological effects of microwave energy, agreed that a Havana Syndrome attack could be caused by a small apparatus that could fit in a van or an SUV. So, within the U.S. government, analysis debated whether the alleged attacks affected a deliberate attempt to cause injury or whether the reported symptoms were a coincidence of high-tech attempt to steal classified information from phones, computers, and of U.S. officials. So what do you think about that? Is the GRU using some kind of device an attempt to steal information, and that ended up causing these unexplained or unintended symptoms within these officials?
I don't think it's the GRU, but I believe it is a device that's trying to. I don't think they're trying to steal any information, but I could possibly think that they're trying to manipulate human beings on a certain wavelength.
Oh, really?
I would say, think Fallout. We're just an experiment to the government.
Right. So, 2021 report in the New Yorker cited a number of incidents recounted by Mark Vandroff, who served as a senior director for defense publicity at the National Security Council. One of the most dramatic episodes involved a U.S. military officer stationed in a country with a large Russian presence. As the officer pulled into his car into a busy intersection, he suddenly felt as though his head were going to explode. His 2-year-old son in the car seat in the back started screaming. As the officer sped out of the intersection, the pressure of his head ceased and his son went quiet. A remarkably similar incident was reported by a CIA officer who was stationed in the same city and who had no connection to the military officer. So, very suspicious. Very suspicious indeed. So, let's rewind back to October of 2021. The New York Times reported that the U.S. diplomats and intelligence officers, including senior leaders, had clashed with the Trump administration appointees, including CIA Director Gina Haspel and State Department leaders, over the nature and causes of the suspected attacks. Now, a Times investigation found that the State Department produced inconsistent assessments of patients and events, ignored outside medical diagnoses, and withheld basic information from Congress. Now, despite the general view within the U.S. government that Russia was responsible, 2 U.S. officials told the Times that Haspel was not convinced of Russia's responsibility or even whether an attack occurred, which that doesn't hold a lot of stock for a Trump appointee because they have a tendency to deny things a lot. So what do you think?
Why would the government withhold its own information and findings from the government? I would never understand such a thing. I mean, don't we all work together?
We should work together, yeah. So let's fast forward. Rewind a bit further to 2018. The State Department report was declassified and posted in the George Washington University's National Security Archive after a Freedom of Information Act litigation brought by the James Madison Project. So the documents indicate that the State Department's botched the handling of the initial reports. Now, Peter Kornblau of the National Security Archive stated that the 2018 report concluded that the department's initial investigation assessment of what was going on was marred by chaos, disorganization, and excessive secrecy. That is excessive secrecy that the government sure loves. So in 2021, sources familiar with the various ongoing investigations told CNN that the primary obstacle to progress by the U.S. government in investigating a syndrome was a lack of interagency coordination between the CIA, the FBI, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Oh, and the State Department as well, which conducted separate and largely siloed investigations. Now, the limited coordination among the varying agencies was based on on the highly classified nature of some of the details and the privacy restrictions of health records that has hampered progress. So why can't we all just work together, Hanyu? Why can't we all just work together?
Because we all have our own agendas, and if you're not helping us with our agenda, then you're just the enemy.
Oh, that's not good. Why can't we all be friends? Why do we have to be enemies? Why can't we be pals?
We're frenemies.
We're frenemies?
Yes. We work together on occasion for the common good of our country, but when it becomes things within our country, we don't see eye to eye. That's why we're in the sprout that we're in.
Right. So a U.S. Office of Special Counsel investigation resulted in an April 2020 determination that there was a substantial likelihood of wrongdoing by State Department leadership. Now, Mark Lindsay, who was a State Department diplomatic security officer stationed in Guangzhou, accused the department of a deliberate, high-level cover-up and of failing to protect their employees. Mark Polymeropoulos a 26-year-old CIA veteran who retired in 2019, similarly felt betrayed by CIA leadership, accusing the agency of failing to respond appropriately to a vertigo-inducing incident in Moscow in December 2017. Blah, 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 blah. So the Polymeropoulos said that the event was an attack and the most terrifying experience of my life. Worse than the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. Can you believe that?
I mean, Iraq and Afghanistan, they're just trying to blow you up, whereas everywhere else, they're just trying to get your brain not functioning.
Right.
Very different.
Yeah. Were you stationed in either Iraq or Afghanistan?
Maybe, maybe not.
Okay.
Am I at liberty to say? Is my redactation time up yet for me to say yes or no on such things?
I mean, the Iraq War ended like years ago, and I think the Afghanistan War ended last year. So let's hold off on that then. So Polymeropoulos fought in the CIA for years to obtain specialized medical treatment. After the agency cast doubt on the similarities between the symptoms, he experienced those experienced by the diplomats in Havana. Now, Polymeropoulos was ultimately diagnosed at the U.S. Governor's Walter Reed Medical Center with traumatic brain injury. Attorney Mark Zaid, who represented almost a dozen clients, had also become ill under similar circumstances. Said that Polymeropoulos was the only one of his clients who had received treatment at Walter Reed, with the others obtaining treatment only from personal doctors or academic medical centers. Makes you think, why is this guy so special to get help from at Walter Reed?
Probably knows a couple of people that keep things on the hush-hush low down, and then after he got treated, probably said something to someone, and now it's a little bit up in arms, and it's like, was it for real or not? I mean, under patient, doctor...
Under patient
Can
doctor...
they speak about it?
They definitely can't. That's patient doctor privilege. It's protected by HIPAA. You can't tell anyone that. So... Near the end of the Trump administration, the Defense Department established a task force to investigate reports of attacks on DoD personnel abroad. Now, the DoD established a task force partly due to frustration over what DoD officials considered to be sluggish and lackluster response by the CIA and Department of State. Christopher C. Miller, who was acting defense secretary at the time, said in 2021 that I knew CIA Department and State were not taking this poop seriously, and we wanted to shame them into establishing our task force. Now, Miller said that he began to consider the reports of mysterious symptoms to be high priority in December 2020, after he conducted an interview with a person with major combat experience who detailed symptoms. That's very interesting. Now, in December 2020, the CIA established a task force to investigate. Now, the agency set up the task force after continued reports of debilitating attacks against CIA officers in various places around the world. The CIA expanded its investigation under Director William J. Burns, who took office in 2021. Burns appointed a senior CIA officer who had previously led the manhunt for Osama bin Laden, and to lead the agency's investigation. March 2021, the State Department appointed Ambassador Pamela L. Spratten, a career Foreign Service officer, to oversee the department task force charged with responding to the incidents. 6 months later, Spratten left her position as coordinator of the task force because she reached the thresholds of hours of labor that she could perform as a retiree. Spratten's resignation had been demanded by people angered by her handling of a conference call with affected employees. During the call with employees, in which Secretary of State Antony Blinken also took part, Brashen did not take a position on whether the psychogenic causes were the cause of the syndrome, a response that affected diplomats called invalidating. Now, in November 2021, Blinken appointed two senior U.S. diplomats to oversee the department's internal health incident response task force. Career Foreign Service Officer Ambassador Jonathan Moore as overall coordinator, and retired Ambassador Margaret Ayahara. So, the CIA, the DoD, and the State Department, all three have task forces. What do you think about that? And the DoD one, they were forced to do it by this Miller character, who was the defense secretary.
Sounds about right. Remember, everyone needs to have a piece of the pie.
Okay. So, let's go on to the Senate Intelligence Committee leadership. Chairman Mark Warner and Vice Chairman Marco Rubio said in 2021 that it was working with Burns and the CIA on connection with the investigation, saying, "We already held fact-finding hearings on these debilitating attacks, many of which result in a medically confirmed cases of traumatic brain injury, and will do more." May 2021, Politico reported that intelligence officials had recently told Congress that the investigation had expanded due to all 18 federal intelligence agencies and had focused on potential involvement of GRU, the Russian spy agency. So now Congress is saying that they're involving all of the intelligence committee to do it.
Of course. That's a very big pie with lots of little places and people in places all over.
Right. So in September 2021, the CIA Deputy Director David S. Cohen said that the investigation had gotten closer to making a determination, but not close enough to make an analytic judgment that people are waiting for. Now, the BBC wrote that the syndrome was a real impact on the country's ability to operate overseas, reporting that one official called the deciphering of the case the most difficult intelligence challenge they've ever faced.
Oh, wow! No!
Okay. After the reports of the incidents at the Ellipse, nearby the White House in Washington, Defense Department investigators briefed members of Congress, even though it occurred within the U.S. This was because the DoD investigation was more advanced than the FBI or the intelligence community investigations. Now, in January 2021, the Central Intelligence Agency issued an interim assessment and concluding that the syndrome is not the result of a sustained global campaign by a hostile power. So, that's that. So, and that the majority of cases would be explained by natural causes, although it couldn't rule out foreign involvement in approximately 24 cases, many of those from Havana. So, there you have it. CIA says natural causes. It wasn't the Russians or anyone. Do you believe that?
I do not believe it was natural causes. I mean, we are trying to think of supernatural. Something that occurs so much all over the place. It's a different type of thing, and I think our government may or may not have been involved in such a thing. I think they were just experimenting on people, and what better way to experiment but on government officials?
Okay. So, 2021, the State Department commissioned the Jason Advisory Group, an outside panel to perform a comprehensive investigation. It tasked Jason to consider all available data and evaluate mechanisms' ability to produce the reported effects. So the State Department released unclassified portions of the Jason report on February 2022. The report examined two broad questions. Number one, are the events known as anomalous health incidents truly anomalous? In other words, is there a unique cluster of symptoms that exceeded their prevalence in a comparable background population. Question numero 2. Regardless of the answer to the first question, how consistent are the events with a directed energy attack or other physical mechanism? In other words, is it possible for there to be a single underlying cause that can be physiologically linked to reported symptoms and physically linked to the incident reports? Now, on the first question, the report found that 80 to 90% of the incidents can be easily explained by everyday occurrences and other unrelated factors. For the 10 to 20% that could not be easily explained, Jason was not able to perform a statistical analysis due to lack of data on a comparable background population, small numbers, and generally low data quality. So there you have it. Jason says it was easily explained. They can explain it like that. Super easy. Why was this even a mystery, according to Jason? Now, on the second question, the report examined mechanisms related to the electromagnetic energy, all frequencies from RF to ionizing, and acoustic energy like ultrasound or infrasound, audible, and ultrasound. So, ionizing radiation and acoustic energy were easily ruled out, as was RF energy at frequencies less than 500 millihertz or greater than 30 gigahertz. Now, this left region of the RF energy in the 500 megahertz to 3 gigahertz range was not easily ruled out. So, within this range, the report examined several factors derived from the incident reports as a whole, but focusing on the 10 to 20% of the incidents not easily explainable by everyday causes. These factors include the ability to create RF beam that can be focused to a degree consistent with the incident reports, penetrate a building, physiologically affect a human to include the Frey effect, and deliver sufficient power, and to be transmitted from an antenna that would not be easily noticed. Now, considering all these factors, the report concluded that RF energy between 500 megahertz and 30 gigahertz cannot be conclusively ruled out, but is highly likely to be the cause of the incidents. There it is. What do you think? Do you think Jason is right?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'm not.
So, yeah, I mean, Jason did the studies, but they can't conclusively rule anything, but they think it was probably caused by some kind of RF beam, most likely. So, in response to the Havana Syndrome, U.S. Senator Susan Collins introduced a bill co-sponsored by a bipartisan group of 9 other senators that would close a loophole in the Federal Employees Compensation Act that would normally not cover damage to organs such as the brain and heart. Now, the Helping American Victims Affected by Neurological Attacks Act, authorized by the CIA director and the Secretary of State to provide financial support for personnel with brain injuries. And I should also point out that Helping American Victims Affected by Neurological Attacks is also an acronym for Havana. So, the bill passed the House.
They're just covering their own butts.
Okay. You think so? With the Havana Act?
Oh, of course.
So, the bill passed in the House with a 427 to nothing vote, passed by the Senate by unanimous consent, and was signed into law by one President Joe Biden on October 8th, 2021, becoming Public Law number 117-486. An appropriation for funding authorized by the Havana Act has not been passed, though. So, but it has been included in drafts of a Defense Department appropriations bill. So, there's that. So, in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022, passed by Congress in December 2021, included a section directing the president to designate a senior official as anomalous health incidents interagency coordinator to oversee efforts across the federal government to coordinate with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So, required relevant federal agencies to designate a specific high-level anomalous health incident agency coordination lead and directed agencies to develop guidance to employees considered to be at risk of exposure. So, there's that. So they're trying to protect themselves from this Havana Syndrome. So do you think they're doing a good job at it?
No.
It's okay.
I mean, of course they are. Of course.
So the media coverage of Havana Syndrome had been criticized for what some alleged is a conspiratorial tone or journalists' unwillingness to question official explanations. In Jacobin magazine, Branko Marcetic wrote anti-Cuban hawks, using establishment press as their megaphone, have baselessly and incessantly claimed that the illness was actually the result of attacks carried out by Washington's geopolitical adversaries and using a mysterious, never-invented microwave weapon. So this Marcetic guy, he's not buying it. So on January 2022, Ryan Cooper wrote in The Week that there is shame on the great many journalists and members of Congress who stoked inflammatory, implausible claims about magic Russian ray guns. Now, Robert Bartholomew, a medical sociologist specializing in mass psychogenic illnesses, has dismissed 60 Minutes reports of a smoking gun connecting Havana Syndrome to a foreign power or technology. Here's what he says. There is only smoke and mirrors generated by bad science and poor journalism. Now, in the interview with NPR, the New Republic's Natalie Shore said it was a red flag as to its incredibility that the story was being almost exclusively pushed by national security reporters and not by people who report on health topics. So what do you think about that? Do you think the press did a bad job covering Havana Syndrome?
Maybe.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is that people like these other journalists don't seem to like that other main journalist was saying that it was an attack by a foreign power, not done by natural causes. So that's what their big thing is. So, yeah, there you have it. And that's pretty much the story of the Havana Syndrome from start to finish. So what do you think about this whole thing? Are we going to hear more about it soon? Because it's still pretty new, still pretty recent, it's still going on.
We may not. You know how the government likes to keep things a secret for at least a year or two, and like, oh yeah, by the way, so this thing happened again. Just let you know.
Okay.
I had a note to tell you sooner, but I forgot. I lost the note. But yeah, that thing happened.
Okay.
It wasn't an attack from the Russians or ourselves. It just, we don't know, but the guy is still on hold to get paid for the brain injuries because we haven't figured out that budget yet.
Okay. So yeah, there you have it. That's the Havana Syndrome. I've been Nathaniel Avila.
And I'm on you.
And we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to a Vision podcast, home of Wacky Talkies, The Kingdom, Evil Exists, and many more.